There is a moment most men never get to see, yet almost every woman eventually feels it in silence. It doesn't happen during the breakup, it doesn't arrive in the argument, and it doesn't even show up in the first days of distance. It comes later, after her emotional awakening begins to settle, when she suddenly realizes something far more unsettling than separation itself. You are no longer available to her in the way she once assumed you would always be. And that realization doesn't bring peace. It brings collapse. In this video, we'll break down how that moment unfolds, step by step, and why a Stoic man never has to explain what changed. If this hits home, like the video, subscribe, and let's begin. Number 1. The moment awareness begins. Her shift doesn't begin with regret, but with a quiet sense of awareness that something fundamental has changed. There's no argument she can replay, no dramatic moment she can point to and say, "That's when it happened." It arrives subtly. The emotional noise around you has faded. You're no longer adjusting your tone to match her moods, no longer over-explaining, no longer calibrating your behavior to keep things balanced. You're still calm, still respectful, but no longer emotionally centered around her, and she feels that before she can fully understand it. From your side, it doesn't feel intentional. You didn't pull away to make a point. You didn't go cold or distant. You simply stopped managing the emotional atmosphere. You reply when it's natural, not urgent. You keep your routines, your focus, your direction, even when her energy shifts. What feels like stability to you feels like absence to her. And that contrast is what unsettles her. This is where her awakening begins, and where it eventually turns into collapse. Awareness always comes first. Before longing, before fear, she realizes, quietly, that you're no longer available in the same way. Not gone, not angry, just no longer orbiting her reactions. If she was used to being the emotional reference point, this creates a discomfort she can't easily name. From a Stoic perspective, this isn't withdrawal as punishment, but withdrawal as alignment. Stoicism teaches that peace comes from within, not from controlling outcomes or managing other people's emotions. When a man stops outsourcing his inner calm and starts living from internal order, the energy around him changes. She senses that shift long before she understands what caused it. She may test it without realizing she's testing. A slight pullback, a delayed response, a moment of distance to see if you lean in and stabilize things like before. This time, you don't. Not out of strategy, but because your calm no longer depends on her reaction. And that's when awareness sharpens. The emotional access she once had feels limited, not taken away, just no longer automatic. When that realization settles in quietly, without drama or confrontation, it turns inward. And that's the moment the dynamic truly begins to change. Before we move on, take a second to pause with this. Real shifts don't announce themselves. They reveal themselves in moments like these, when calm replaces reaction and presence replaces effort. If any part of this resonated, tap the like button so more people who need this can find it. And I'm curious, have you ever noticed a moment when your silence or steadiness changed the dynamic without you trying to change anything at all? Drop your thoughts in the comments, or simply type, "I master what I do not chase." Let's keep going and discover the next point. Number 2. Curiosity replaces confidence. At first, she assumes nothing is wrong, telling herself that you are simply busy or temporarily distracted, and that things will naturally return to the familiar rhythm. In her mind, this phase is easy to explain away. People get caught up, life gets hectic. She expects that sooner or later you'll resurface with the same availability, the same emotional accessibility. That belief gives her comfort. It lets her stay relaxed, even detached, because she assumes the door is still open exactly where she left it. But as the days stretch on, without reassurance, something subtle begins to shift. Your absence doesn't feel dramatic, it feels unfamiliar. There's no check-in, no emotional pulse. No quiet signal that you're still circling her world. And that's when confidence quietly gives way to curiosity. She starts asking herself questions she never had to ask before. Why hasn't he reached out? Why does it feel different this time? Why doesn't his energy feel available, even from a distance? This is where awakening begins, and where collapse is quietly seated. Curiosity pulls her inward. She starts replaying interactions, scanning conversations, rereading moments for clues. Not because she misses you yet, but because her certainty is no longer solid. Curiosity introduces doubt, and doubt destabilizes the story she was telling herself, that she had control, that she could step back and return whenever she wanted. Here's the part most people misunderstand. You didn't do anything to create this shift. You didn't pull away to provoke a reaction. You didn't go silent to make a point. You simply stopped being available in the way she unconsciously relied on. And from a Stoic perspective, that's the difference between manipulation and self-governance. A Stoic man doesn't adjust his presence to manage someone else's emotions. He moves according to his own principles, his own priorities, his own inner order. Think about how destabilizing that is for someone who expected access. She assumed your attention was a constant something she could lean on without effort. Now, instead of confidence, she has questions. And questions are uncomfortable. They force awareness. They signal that something has changed beneath the surface, even if she can't name it yet. This is the moment her awakening begins to tilt toward collapse. Not because she suddenly feels loss, but because she feels uncertainty. The ground she was standing on no longer feels stable. And all you did was remain calm, grounded, and aligned with your own life. As the Stoics would say, you focused on what was within your control, and in doing so, you quietly removed yourself from what was never meant to be controlled at all. Number 3. The first reach that meets stillness. Eventually, she reaches out not with intensity or vulnerability, but with something casual and seemingly harmless. A short message, a light joke, maybe a, "Hey, I just thought of you." On the surface, it looks friendly, easy, almost accidental. But underneath, it's a test. She isn't reaching to open her heart. She's reaching to see if access still exists, to see if you're still there in the same way. And what she receives in return isn't rejection. It isn't coldness. It's stillness. Your response arrives without urgency, without emotional hunger, without that familiar pull she once relied on. You reply calmly, briefly, grounded in your own pace. There's no chasing tone, no hidden question, no attempt to extend the conversation just to keep the door open. And that's where something inside her shifts. This is the moment her awakening begins to turn into collapse. Because she didn't expect resistance, she expected familiarity. She expected the old rhythm where her presence automatically stirred you, where a simple message reopened emotional access. Instead, she feels a subtle distance that she didn't ask for and doesn't know how to control. Think about it from her side. In the past, reaching out gave her reassurance. Even if she was unsure about you, your reaction confirmed her influence. Your attention was proof. But now, your calm response doesn't reward the test. It doesn't punish it either. It simply doesn't feed it. And that neutrality is deeply unsettling. This is where Stoicism quietly enters the scene. Stoicism isn't about ignoring people or acting detached for effect. It's about responding from choice rather than reflex. You're no longer moved by impulse or validation. You answer because you decide to not, because her presence activates something unresolved inside you. Your emotional center isn't outsourced anymore. And she feels that. She may not name it, but she senses the difference. The power dynamic she once leaned on isn't there. The certainty she had that you would always be emotionally available starts to crack. Her awakening, which once felt empowering, now runs into a wall she didn't expect. Here's the key part most people miss. Your stillness isn't meant to teach her a lesson. It's not a strategy. It's a byproduct of your growth. You're not withholding, you're simply no longer reaching from the same place. And when a woman realizes that access to you is no longer guaranteed, curiosity turns into discomfort. Confidence turns into doubt. That's when her awakening begins to collapse, not because you did something dramatic, but because you didn't. You stayed grounded. You stayed centered. And in doing so, you showed her something Stoicism has always taught. True power isn't loud, reactive, or emotional. It's steady. It's self-contained. And once she feels that you no longer need her to feel complete, the dynamic is never the same again. Number 4. When control slips away. As the pattern continues, she begins to notice something deeply uncomfortable. She can no longer predict you. Your emotional availability, once reliable and measurable, now feels independent and self-contained. The control she once felt without realizing it is gone, not because you reclaimed it, but because you stopped offering it freely. And this is where her awakening quietly starts turning into collapse. Think about how it used to be. She knew when you would check in. She knew a certain silence from her would pull a reaction from you. If she pulled back, you leaned in. If she hesitated, you reassured. None of this was malicious on her part, it was simply a dynamic that formed over time. But now, something has shifted. She sends a message and doesn't immediately get emotional confirmation. She creates distance and doesn't feel you chasing to close the gap. You're still calm, still polite, still grounded, but you're no longer available in the way she expects. That's deeply unsettling for someone who unconsciously relied on access to your emotions as a form of stability. Because now, she can't tell what you're thinking. She can't tell how much space she occupies in your mind. And worse, she can sense that your center of gravity is no longer her reactions. It's you. From a Stoic perspective, this is what self-governance actually looks like in real life. A Stoic man doesn't announce boundaries or dramatize his growth. He simply stops outsourcing his emotional regulation. He understands that peace doesn't come from being chosen, it comes from choosing himself consistently. And once a man reaches that point, he becomes unpredictable in the best possible way. Not chaotic, not cold, just internally anchored. For her, this feels like losing leverage without ever being told it was gone. The rules she thought still applied no longer work. And that's when confusion creeps in. Her awakening, the moment she realizes you mattered more than she admitted, doesn't feel empowering anymore. It feels destabilizing. Because now, even if she wanted to pull you back into the old pattern, she can't. You're no longer standing where she left you. And the realization that you're unavailable, not emotionally shut down, but emotionally sovereign, is what quietly collapses the illusion of control she never knew she had. Take a second to reflect. When did you notice yourself choosing calm over reaction? Independence over reassurance? If this resonates, leave a comment sharing what part of this hit closest to home, or simply type, "I govern my own emotions." Then, let's continue. Because what comes next is where this internal shift starts creating consequences she never anticipated. Number 5. Comparison starts working against her. Without intending to, she begins comparing her current experiences to the presence you embodied, and this is where her awakening quietly starts to turn into collapse. At first, the comparisons are subtle. A passing thought, a brief pause. She's out with someone new, or entertaining a different connection, and something feels off. The energy is louder. The emotions are sharper. There's more reacting, more explaining, more tension beneath the surface. On paper, nothing is wrong. But internally, something doesn't sit right anymore. And that's when your absence enters the picture. She remembers how it felt to be around you. Not the version of you that tried to convince her, explain himself, or chase clarity, but the version of you that was steady, grounded, calm, without being cold. At the time, she misread that composure as emotional distance. Now, surrounded by people who overreact, overperform, or constantly seek reassurance, that same composure feels rare, almost irreplaceable. You see, comparison only works when the contrast becomes obvious, and your silence created contrast without effort. You didn't need to point out your value. You didn't argue your worth. You simply removed yourself, and in doing so, you allowed reality to speak for you. Here's where the shift deepens. She doesn't miss attention. She doesn't miss chasing energy. She misses the emotional safety she didn't know she was standing in. The kind that doesn't fluctuate with moods. The kind that doesn't demand constant validation. The kind that allows space without threatening connection. And that realization doesn't arrive comfortably. It arrives quietly, and then it lingers. From a Stoic perspective, this is natural. Stoicism teaches that true value is often invisible while it's available. When something is freely given, it's assumed to be permanent. Only when it's withdrawn, not in anger, not in punishment, but in self-respect, does its weight become undeniable. You didn't leave to be missed. You left because your peace mattered. And that choice changed the emotional math. So now, every interaction she has becomes a mirror. Every reactive moment reminds her of your restraint. Every emotional spike reminds her of your steadiness. And slowly, what once felt like liberation begins to feel like loss. Not because you disappeared, but because she finally understands what your presence actually offered. And by the time that understanding settles in, you're no longer available to step back into the role she once took for granted. Number 6. Her awakening peaks too late. Her awakening doesn't arrive in the chaos of the breakup. It doesn't come when emotions are loud or when distance still feels temporary. It comes later, quietly, when the noise has faded and the reality has settled in. And by the time clarity finally reaches her, something crucial has already changed. At this point, she starts reframing everything she once misunderstood. Your silence no longer feels cold. It no longer looks like indifference or avoidance. Now, she sees it for what it really was: control, restraint. A man who refused to beg, argue, or perform emotionally just to stay relevant. What once felt passive now registers as strength. What she labeled as pulling away now looks like self-respect. This is usually the moment she thinks, "I finally get it." She realizes you weren't trying to punish her with distance. You weren't trying to teach a lesson. You were simply choosing peace over emotional chaos. And that realization hits hard because it arrives when access to you is no longer guaranteed. Think about how often clarity shows up after comfort is gone. When you were still available, still reachable, still predictable, there was no urgency to fully understand you. Your consistency made your value feel permanent. But once you stopped reacting, once you stopped reaching out, once you stopped positioning yourself as an option waiting to be chosen, her perspective shifted. Not because you explained yourself, but because you removed yourself. And here's where Stoicism quietly enters the picture. A Stoic man understands that growth doesn't pause for someone else's delayed awareness. He doesn't rewind his progress just because someone finally caught up emotionally. He knows that insight without timing doesn't reopen doors, it simply explains why they closed. Clarity arriving late doesn't undo the distance, it confirms it. So when she finally sees you clearly, the collapse begins not because she lost you dramatically, but because she realizes she misjudged a man who was steady all along. And the hardest part for her isn't that you changed, it's that you didn't. You stayed grounded, you stayed disciplined, you stayed aligned with yourself. And by the time her awakening fully forms, you're no longer standing in the same place, waiting to be understood. That's the quiet power of timing. And that's why awakening, when it arrives too late, doesn't lead to reunion, it leads to realization. Number 7. Emotional urgency meets your calm. Now she feels it, that sudden urgency, the quiet panic that creeps in when something once familiar starts slipping out of reach. There's a tightening in her chest, a sense that if she doesn't do something soon, the door may close for good. This is the moment her awakening begins to wobble. She's realizing you're no longer available in the way you once were, and the certainty she felt before is starting to collapse under that realization. What unsettles her most isn't just the possibility of losing you, it's the contrast. While her emotions rush forward, yours do not. You're not reacting. You're not chasing clarity, reassurance, or closure. You're grounded, steady, still walking your path as if the emotional turbulence unfolding around her isn't pulling at you anymore. And that calm creates a psychological imbalance she can't ignore. Think about how this looks from her side. She might send a message and notice you don't reply the way you used to. Or she hears through someone else that you're focused, disciplined, moving forward with your life. No bitterness, no drama, just distance. Not cold distance, but settled distance. That's when her awakening turns inward and begins to crack. Because urgency needs friction to survive. It needs emotional movement on the other side, and you're no longer providing it. Stoicism speaks directly to this moment. Calm is not the absence of feeling its mastery over it. You've learned to govern your reactions rather than be ruled by them. And when her urgency collides with your composure, it exposes something uncomfortable for her. She's reacting, and you're responding only to what aligns with your values. You're no longer emotionally available on demand. You're available by choice. This is where the collapse happens. Her awakening may have started with confidence, maybe even relief, but now she's facing a version of you who isn't waiting, isn't proving, isn't explaining. A man who understands that peace is not something to be negotiated away. And as Marcus Aurelius reminded us, when you stand firm in your inner order, you don't need to resist chaos. It reveals itself on its own. So if you're watching this and wondering whether your calm matters, understand this. Your steadiness doesn't just change the dynamic, it forces reflection. While she rushes to regain certainty, you've already accepted what is and chosen your path forward. And that quiet decision is what turns her emotional awakening into something far more unsettling. The realization that she may have already lost access to you. Pause for a moment to sit with what this really means. This isn't about winning, proving a point, or hoping for a specific outcome. It's about recognizing the power of inner alignment and how often we underestimate it while we're living it. Ask yourself, where in your life have you chosen calm over reaction, standards over urgency, peace over explanation? That choice always leaves a mark, whether you see it immediately or not. If this resonates, pause the video for a second and reflect. And if you're willing, leave a comment sharing what part of this shift hit closest to home for you. Sometimes, putting it into words is the first step toward fully owning it. Number 8. The collapse of assumptions. One belief quietly collapses within her, the assumption that your availability was permanent and unconditional. And this isn't a dramatic breakdown. There's no argument, no confrontation. It happens slowly, in the space where certainty used to live. She realizes often too late that your presence was never guaranteed. It was offered, chosen, maintained through respect, alignment, and mutual value. And once those things slipped, access did too. This is usually the moment her awakening turns into collapse. At first, she thought your calm would remain no matter what, that you'd still be there, steady, understanding, patient waiting. Maybe she assumed distance would make you try harder. Maybe she believed silence would pull reassurance out of you. But instead, what she finds is something far more unsettling. You're no longer available in the way she expected. Not emotionally, not energetically, not in spirit. Here's where the realization hits. She begins replaying past moments differently. The times you didn't argue, the moments you chose restraint over reaction. What she once interpreted as endless patience now looks like self-control. What felt like unconditional acceptance now reveals itself as conditional on respect. And that shift is jarring. Because it means she didn't lose you by accident, she lost access by misreading the terms. From a Stoic perspective, this is natural. Stoicism never teaches a man to offer himself without limits. It teaches alignment with principle, integrity, self-governance. A Stoic man doesn't threaten withdrawal, and he doesn't announce boundaries. He lives them, and when those boundaries are crossed, he doesn't collapse into explanation, he simply steps back into himself. Calmly, quietly, without resentment. Think about how unsettling that is from her side. There's no door slam, no emotional chaos to react to, just a growing awareness that something once available is no longer reachable. She may still see you moving forward, still disciplined, still grounded, but now there's a distance she can't close with a message, a memory, or a moment of nostalgia. That's the collapse. Not of feelings, but of assumptions. And this is the part I want you to really hear as you're watching this. You didn't take anything away. You didn't punish. You didn't retreat to prove a point. You simply stopped offering what was no longer respected. That's not cruelty, that's clarity. As the Stoics remind us, integrity does not negotiate its worth. It doesn't beg to be recognized. It stands and lets others realize on their own what it was holding the entire time. So when her awakening turns heavy, when confidence turns into quiet unease, it's not because you changed into someone colder. It's because she finally sees the structure beneath your calm. And by the time she understands it, you're no longer standing where she left you. Number 9. She notices you didn't replace, you refined. As she watches from a distance, something quietly unsettles her. You didn't rush into someone else's arms to soothe the loss. You didn't flood your time with noise, attention, or distractions just to avoid feeling alone. Instead, your life grew calmer, more deliberate, more grounded. And that's when her awakening begins and slowly turns into collapse. Because she expected absence to weaken you. She expected you to scramble, to replace, to react. That expectation gave her comfort. It reinforced the story that you needed her to stay balanced. But what she sees now doesn't match that story. You didn't replace, you refined. Your routines tightened, your standards rose. Your energy stopped scattering outward and started consolidating inward. And from her side of the silence, that shift is deeply confusing. Think about how this looks to her. She checks in out of curiosity, maybe through mutual friends, maybe through social media, maybe just through memory. She expects to see chaos or compensation. Instead, she sees structure, consistency. A man who didn't collapse emotionally when access was removed. A man who didn't bargain for attention. A man who kept moving forward without explanation. That's when the awakening starts to hurt. This is where Stoicism quietly enters the picture, not as a philosophy you announce, but as something you embody. A Stoic man doesn't improve to provoke regret. He doesn't refine himself to send a message. He does it because excellence is a duty to himself. Marcus Aurelius wrote about doing the work that's in front of you without waiting for applause, and that's exactly what you did. You treated self-mastery as non-negotiable, not as a reaction to loss. And here's the part most people miss. Your refinement removes her role as a reference point. When you stop reacting, she can't measure herself against you anymore. When you stop needing, she can't feel chosen by absence. Your calm becomes a mirror she didn't ask for. It reflects a truth she wasn't prepared to face, that you were never dependent on her presence to become more grounded, more disciplined, more whole. That realization is where her awakening collapses. Because she thought distance would lower your value. Instead, it clarified it. She thought your silence was temporary. Instead, it became structural. And when a woman realizes that your growth didn't pause for her and doesn't require her, that's when curiosity turns into unease, and unease turns into loss. So if you're watching this and wondering whether staying steady, improving quietly, and refusing to react actually matters, this is your answer. Not because it guarantees her return, but because it protects your center. And in Stoic terms, that's the only thing you were ever meant to control. Number 10. Regret without a door to return to. Regret eventually arrives, not dramatically, but quietly, accompanied by uncertainty. She does not see a clear path back, sensing that you are neither hostile nor distant, but simply unavailable in a way that feels final. And this is where the shift really happens, because her awakening doesn't come with clarity, it comes with collapse. At first, she may have believed that space would always be temporary, that if she ever felt unsure, you would still be there in the background, not waiting desperately, but accessible, a message away. A familiar door she could knock on if the new reality didn't feel as good as she imagined. But now, she notices something unsettling. The door isn't slammed, it isn't guarded, it's just gone. And that absence is far more disorienting than rejection ever could be. You're not cold, you're not angry, you're not trying to prove a point. You've simply continued your life without leaving emotional breadcrumbs behind. And that's what makes this moment collapse in on her. Because there's nothing to react to, no tension to play with, no emotional leverage, just the quiet realization that your availability was never permanent. It was a privilege. Think about how this feels from her side. She replays conversations in her head, looking for signs she missed. She wonders when the shift happened. Was it when you stopped explaining yourself? When you stopped checking in? Or when your energy stopped reaching outward altogether? She may even try a small test, a casual message, a familiar tone expecting the old access to reappear. But what she meets instead is neutrality, calm, closure, without words. This is where Stoicism shows its quiet power. Stoicism doesn't teach you to punish, to withdraw in anger, or to disappear to create panic. It teaches self-governance. It teaches that when something no longer aligns with your peace, you step back without drama. You don't announce boundaries, you live them. And when lived consistently, they don't invite negotiation. Her awakening was the moment she realized she might lose you. Her collapse is the moment she understands she already has, and there's no version of you standing by, waiting to be reactivated. You didn't shut the door to make her regret leaving. You simply walked forward, and in doing so, made it clear that access to you required presence, respect, and timing. And timing, once missed, doesn't reset. This is the point where many men don't realize how much power has already shifted. Not through words, not through absence meant to provoke, but through consistency. When you choose peace without needing to announce it, the outcome is no longer negotiable. If this perspective resonates with you, hit like, leave a comment, sharing what stood out, or simply type, "I choose my peace." And with that understanding in place, the next stage becomes impossible to ignore. Number 11. The final realization. The final realization settles in slowly. She didn't just lose you, but access to the version of you that was emotionally reachable. At first, this doesn't feel dramatic to her. It shows up in quiet moments when she thinks about reaching out and realizes she no longer knows how to reach you, not because you blocked her, not because you disappeared, but because the man she once had easy access to no longer exists in the same way. This is where her awakening begins to collapse. She may have believed your distance was temporary, that your calm was just another phase, that eventually you would soften, explain, or re-enter the dynamic on familiar terms. Many people assume availability is permanent. They confuse consistency with obligation. But when a man shifts from seeking reassurance to living by his own internal standards, the rules quietly change. You've probably felt this shift yourself. There's a moment where you stop checking your phone with anticipation, where your decisions are no longer shaped around how they'll be received, where your energy turns inward, not in bitterness, but in clarity. That's a deeply Stoic position. Stoicism teaches that peace comes from governing what's within your control, not negotiating your worth through someone else's attention. You didn't withdraw to punish her. You realigned because chasing no longer made sense. And here's the part that unsettles her the most. She can still see you. You're still moving forward, still composed, still present in the world. But the emotional doorway she once walked through freely is closed. Access is no longer automatic. Conversations, if they happen at all, feel different, lighter, shorter, boundaried. The familiarity she relied on is gone, and with it, the illusion that she could return whenever she wanted and find the same version of you waiting. That's when the collapse happens. The awakening told her she had options. The collapse teaches her that timing matters, and some doors don't reopen once a man has chosen his peace. By the time she fully understands that truth, you're no longer standing where she left you. You're operating from a different internal place, altogether. Not hardened, not cold, just anchored. And that's something she can feel, even if she never says it out loud. And this is where the story truly closes. Not with anger, not with revenge, and not with a dramatic ending, but with clarity. What she experiences as collapse is simply the delayed understanding of a shift that already happened within you. You didn't disappear. You didn't harden. You didn't become someone else. You became anchored. You stopped offering emotional access without alignment. You chose peace over explanation, direction over reaction, and self-governance over waiting to be understood. And once a man reaches that place, there is no need to reopen. Doors that only existed because he kept holding them open. Her realization arrives quietly, but by then, you are already living from a different internal standard, one that doesn't move backward for late clarity. If this resonated with you, take a moment to like the video. It helps this message reach men who need it. Leave a comment and share what part stood out to you or where you noticed this shift in your own life. And when you're ready, watch the recommended videos on screen to go deeper into building calm, discipline, and self-respect that doesn't depend on anyone else. She thought she traded up. She believed she chose better, more exciting, more stimulating, more right for the moment. But time has a way of stripping away emotional noise and revealing emotional truth. And now, slowly, quietly, what once felt like a confident decision is turning into something she didn't expect: regret. In this video, we're breaking down 10 stages of what happens after she swaps you for better, and how a Stoic man's quiet strength becomes clearer with time, not louder. If you value self-respect, inner control, and emotional discipline, like the video, subscribe, and let's begin. Number 1. The upgrade illusion. At first, everything feels justified in her mind. The new connection looks brighter, more exciting, more emotionally stimulating. There's novelty, attention, and that rush of something different. It feels like progress. And if you've ever been on the other side of that choice, you already know how confusing that moment can feel. Because from her perspective, she isn't trying to hurt anyone. She's chasing a feeling, a sense of aliveness, a belief that more intensity must mean more value. Early on, the contrast does most of the work for her. The new person says different things, reacts faster, mirrors her emotions more dramatically. It feels like movement after stillness, like color after routine. But here's the part most people don't understand until much later. Contrast is not substance. It's just difference. And difference can feel intoxicating when you're bored, uncertain, or restless. That's why so many choices made in emotional peaks don't survive the calm that follows. What she called an upgrade was often just stimulation, packaged as meaning. High emotion mistaken for depth. Constant attention mistaken for care. Intensity mistaken for connection. And at first, it works. She feels chosen, energized, seen. But intensity has a cost. It demands fuel. It needs constant novelty to stay alive. And over time, it starts to wobble. The emotional highs come with lows. The excitement comes with instability. And slowly, the shine begins to fade. Now, here's where you come back into the picture. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly. You were never built on emotional fireworks. You didn't create chaos just to feel important. You showed up steady, present, grounded. And in a world that worships stimulation, that kind of presence can look ordinary, even replaceable, until life applies pressure. This is where a Stoic perspective matters. Stoicism teaches that what's valuable isn't what excites us in the moment, but what remains reliable when circumstances shift. You didn't try to be everything at once. You didn't perform for approval. You offered consistency. And consistency doesn't beg to be noticed, it proves itself over time. When her new situation starts to reveal cracks, miscommunication, emotional volatility, unmet expectations, something subtle happens. Her memory recalibrates. She starts remembering how calm felt, how safe conversations were, how your steadiness didn't need constant validation. What once felt boring now feels rare. And that's the illusion exposed. The upgrade wasn't an upgrade at all. It was a trade depth for stimulation, stability for excitement. And time, which never lies, slowly turns that decision into a lesson she didn't expect to learn. Number 2. Silence removes the comparison. When she left, she expected a reaction, maybe explanations, maybe emotional chasing, something that would keep you in the comparison game. That expectation wasn't random. It was familiar. In many past situations, emotion was the currency. Distance created anxiety, and anxiety pulled responses out of you. Reassurance, clarification, effort. And as long as you stayed emotionally active, the story remained alive in her mind. She could measure, compare, reassure herself that she made the right choice by watching you react to it. But this time, you didn't play that role. You didn't rush to explain yourself. You didn't try to compete with the image she had built of someone else. You stepped back, calmly, quietly. And that single decision changed the entire psychological landscape. Comparison only works when two things remain in motion at the same time. As long as you're reacting, you stay relevant to the comparison. She can say, "He's emotional," the other one is confident, or "He's still invested," the other one feels exciting. But the moment you remove your emotional participation, the comparison loses its anchor. There's no data to weigh, no reaction to interpret, no proof that she still holds power over you. Silence creates a vacuum, and the mind hates empty space. When you stopped reacting, she lost the ability to justify her decision in real time. There was nothing to measure you against anymore. The new connection had to stand on its own, and that's where discomfort begins. Without your emotional responses, she can't frame you as less than anymore. There's no visible weakness to point to, no desperation to contrast against someone else's confidence. Your absence removes the reference point she used to make herself feel certain, and certainty is what she was chasing in the first place. This is where Stoicism quietly shows its power. A Stoic man understands that dignity doesn't demand recognition. It doesn't argue its worth. It doesn't chase understanding from someone who already chose to leave. It remains composed, trusting that time reveals what emotion tries to rush. Your silence didn't defend you. It didn't explain you. It didn't attempt to correct her perception. Instead, it allowed reality to do what arguments never can. As days pass without emotional feedback from you, curiosity replaces confidence. Questions replace conclusions. She starts wondering why you're not reacting the way she expected. And that question becomes heavier than any explanation you could have offered. Eventually, the comparison collapses entirely, because the moment you stop competing, there is nothing left to compare. And what remains is the quiet realization that maybe the value she dismissed didn't disappear at all. It simply stopped trying to be seen. Before we move on, take a moment to sit with what you just heard. Notice how silence didn't weaken your position. It strengthened it by removing the need to prove anything at all. That shift is subtle, but powerful. If this resonates, tap like to support the channel and leave a comment sharing what stood out to you. Or simply type, "I choose calm over reaction" to mark this moment of self-control. Number 3. The emotional safety she took for granted. There was a time when your calm presence felt normal to her. Your steady tone, your patience, your ability to not escalate every emotional moment. When tensions rose, you didn't rush to dominate the conversation or turn disagreement into drama. You listened, you slowed things down, you responded instead of reacting. And because that steadiness was consistent, it blended into the background of her life. It became something she expected rather than something she consciously valued. At the time, that kind of emotional regulation didn't feel special to her. It felt basic, predictable, almost invisible. In a culture that often confuses emotional chaos with passion, calm can look unimpressive. Stability doesn't demand attention. It doesn't create spikes. It doesn't keep the nervous system on edge. And because of that, it's easy to underestimate. But fast forward into a different dynamic, and the contrast becomes unavoidable. Now, emotions come with sharp edges. Conversations shift suddenly. One moment feels close, the next feels distant. Instead of resolution, there's tension. Instead of clarity, there's confusion. Small misunderstandings escalate. Emotional reactions replace thoughtful responses. And slowly, something changes inside her. She starts to feel the weight of unpredictability. Not always consciously, not in words she would immediately admit, but in her body. In that low-level anxiety that hums beneath the surface. The sense that she has to monitor moods, choose words carefully, brace for reactions. And that's when the memory of you starts to return not as nostalgia, but as contrast. With you, she didn't feel the need to stay alert. She could express herself without fear of emotional fallout. She didn't have to manage your reactions or walk on eggshells. There was room to breathe, room to be imperfect, room to be human. That's emotional safety, and it's rarely celebrated while it's present. It's only fully understood when it's gone. This is where Stoicism quietly explains what's happening. A Stoic man doesn't create emotional safety by constantly pleasing or performing. He creates it by governing himself, by not letting every feeling turn into an action, by choosing composure over impulse. That kind of self-mastery doesn't feel exciting in the moment. It feels steady, reliable. And because it's reliable, it's often overlooked. But when emotional volatility becomes the new normal, steadiness suddenly looks priceless. She begins to notice what life feels like without it. The absence of your calm doesn't create fireworks, it creates friction. And in that friction, understanding grows. She may not articulate it right away. She may not even connect the dots consciously. But over time, a realization settles in. Emotional safety wasn't something you provided accidentally. It was something you embodied. And now that it's missing, its value becomes impossible to ignore. Number 4. Excitement can't replace respect. Excitement is loud. Respect is quiet. And in the beginning, loud always feels more convincing. Excitement grabs attention. It creates sparks, big emotions, quick reactions. It feels like something is happening. That's why it's so easy to confuse excitement with connection, especially early on. Everything feels amplified. Conversations move fast. Feelings rise quickly. There's a sense of momentum that makes it seem meaningful. But excitement on its own doesn't have a backbone. It doesn't create structure. Over time, it turns into emotional noise. The same intensity that once felt thrilling starts to feel erratic. Words are said quickly, then forgotten. Promises sound good in the moment but aren't supported by action. Boundaries get crossed, then apologized for, then crossed again. There's motion, but no direction. This is usually when she starts feeling unsettled without fully knowing why. The connection is active, but not anchored. She may feel desired, but not deeply considered. There's energy, but not consistency. And slowly, excitement without respect begins to exhaust instead of energize. Now, contrast that with what you brought. With you, there was a quiet respect that didn't announce itself. You respected yourself enough not to overreact emotionally. You didn't chase every fluctuation in her mood. You didn't abandon your values just to maintain closeness. And because you weren't constantly trying to secure her attention, your presence carried weight. Respect shows up in restraint, in knowing when to speak and when to stay silent, in not needing to win every emotional moment. You didn't lose your center trying to keep her interested. And that self-respect naturally extended outward. It shaped how you treated her, how you listened, how you handled conflict. This is where Stoicism fits naturally. Stoic philosophy teaches men to hold their center regardless of external chaos, to be guided by principle rather than impulse. That inner stability becomes a reference point not just for you, but for anyone connected to you. When someone knows where they stand with you, when your reactions are measured, and your values consistent, trust forms quietly. Once she experiences a connection without that grounded presence, something becomes clear. Excitement alone doesn't hold anything together. It doesn't create safety. It doesn't build trust. It doesn't endure pressure. Without respect, excitement burns fast and leaves little behind. She may not label it immediately. She may just feel that something is missing. But eventually, the realization lands. What felt loud and thrilling couldn't replace what was solid and steady. And by then, the respect you embodied without ever demanding it starts to stand out in a way excitement never could. Number 5. Time removes emotional bias. In the moment, emotions distort memory. Decisions feel obvious. Justifications feel solid. When feelings are high, the mind doesn't search for truth, it searches for relief. It arranges the past in whatever way makes the present choice feel correct. That's how emotional bias works. It edits reality in real time, highlighting flaws, downplaying effort, and reshaping history, so leaving feels not just acceptable, but necessary. At that stage, everything she remembers about you is filtered through emotion. Moments of calm become moments of distance. Your restraint becomes lack of passion. Your patience becomes not trying hard enough. And because emotion is loud, those interpretations feel convincing. They feel final. But emotion doesn't stay hot forever. Time does something powerful and unavoidable. It cools things down. And when emotion cools, the mind begins reorganizing memory. Not all at once. Not dramatically, quietly, subtly, one moment at a time. That's when she starts replaying the past differently, not through the lens of justification, but through reflection. She remembers how you didn't escalate arguments when things got tense, how you chose calm over control, how you listened even when you could have walked away emotionally, how you showed effort without turning it into performance. What once felt unremarkable now feels intentional. Your restraint during conflict no longer looks passive, it looks mature. Your patience no longer looks boring, it looks rare. The things she dismissed when emotions were loud begin to stand out when everything is quiet. This is why Stoicism places such deep trust in time. Stoic philosophy understands that truth doesn't need urgency. It doesn't need to defend itself in the heat of the moment. It allows emotion to pass, knowing that clarity arrives when the noise fades. A Stoic man doesn't rush to correct someone's perception. He stays aligned with his principles and lets time do what explanations never can. Distance creates perspective, and perspective reveals patterns that emotion once hid. She begins to see that you were consistent, that you didn't change who you were based on her mood, that you tried to build something sustainable rather than something dramatic. This doesn't mean regret hits all at once. It arrives in fragments. A comparison here, a memory there, a quiet thought during an unrelated moment. 83. But each time, the emotional bias weakens. The story she told herself starts developing cracks. And in that space, something honest emerges. Not the version of you shaped by emotion, but the version shaped by behavior over time. The one that remained steady. The one that didn't need validation to stay grounded. And slowly, she realizes what Stoicism already understands. Truth doesn't rush. It waits. And when it finally surfaces, it's much harder to ignore. And this is the moment where it helps to pause, because what you're hearing here isn't about winning her back, proving a point, or waiting for a reaction. It's about understanding how time works when you stop interfering with it. Reflection only happens when you're no longer trying to control the outcome. So before we move on, take a second and ask yourself, where in your life have you stayed steady instead of emotional, even when it would have been easier to react? That quiet consistency matters more than most people realize. If this resonates, leave a comment and share what stood out to you, or simply type, "I let time speak." Number 6. The absence of pressure becomes noticeable. With you, she wasn't suffocated. You didn't constantly demand reassurance. You didn't emotionally corner her. You gave space not out of indifference, but out of self-control. At the time, that space may have been misunderstood. It may have felt like you weren't leaning in enough, or that you weren't trying to lock things down emotionally. In a world that often equates pressure with care, restraint can be misread. But space has a way of revealing its value, only in contrast. Once she steps into a dynamic where attention is constant and expectations are heavy, the difference becomes impossible to ignore. Messages arrive loaded with meaning. Silence triggers insecurity. Every interaction feels like it carries an unspoken demand. And slowly, what once felt like intensity begins to feel like weight. Pressure doesn't always announce itself as control. Sometimes it shows up as emotional monitoring, the need for constant validation, the subtle guilt when space is taken, the expectation to respond, reassure, explain, and over time, that pressure narrows the room to breathe. She may feel wanted, but not free, desired, but not relaxed. That's when memory does something interesting. She starts remembering how it felt with you, how conversations didn't come with hidden expectations, how she could take space without consequence, how silence didn't automatically mean something was wrong. The absence of pressure becomes noticeable precisely because pressure is now present elsewhere. What once felt like distance now feels like trust. You weren't trying to manage her emotions or control the outcome. You allowed the connection to exist without squeezing it. And that freedom wasn't accidental, it came from self-regulation. This is where Stoicism quietly explains your behavior. A Stoic man understands that trying to control people is a losing strategy. Emotions can't be forced. Affection can't be demanded. Instead of grasping, he focuses inward. He governs his impulses. He doesn't collapse into anxiety when things feel uncertain. That internal discipline creates external ease. In a world full of emotional grasping, restraint becomes rare. Most people react to uncertainty by tightening their grip. You did the opposite. You stayed centered. And that center allowed space to exist without fear. She may not immediately connect that feeling to you consciously, but she notices it in her body, the tension she didn't have before, the mental load she now carries, the way freedom quietly disappeared and was replaced by obligation. And that's when understanding starts to form. The space you offered wasn't emptiness. It was room to breathe, room to choose, room to be herself without pressure. And once that's gone, its value becomes unmistakable. Number 7, she starts measuring, not feeling. At first, her decisions were emotional. Now they become analytical. When feelings were loud, choice felt instinctive, chemistry-led, excitement decided. But once the emotional surge settles, something shifts inside her. The questions change. It's no longer, how does this make me feel right now? But what does this actually look like over time? She starts measuring instead of feeling, not in a cold or calculating way, but in a reflective one. She begins paying attention to patterns rather than moments. How does a man respond under stress? What happens when plans fall apart? Does frustration turn into blame, or does it turn into composure? Does disappointment bring accountability, or does it trigger emotional reactions? Chemistry is easy to find, character is not, and this distinction becomes clear only after experience creates contrast. She realizes that attraction without stability doesn't hold. Emotional highs don't answer real-life pressure. Charm fades when routines set in, and now, she's no longer impressed by performance, she's watching behavior. This is where Stoic masculinity quietly enters the picture. Not loudly, not forcefully, but unmistakably. Stoic principles aren't about appearing calm, they're about being governed from within. You didn't try to prove how balanced you were. You didn't sell an image of emotional control. You simply lived in alignment with it. When things didn't go your way, you didn't spiral. You didn't lash out. You didn't collapse into self-pity or ego defense. You stayed measured, grounded. And that kind of internal order doesn't register immediately in emotionally charged moments. It becomes visible only when life applies pressure. Now she starts replaying interactions through a different lens. She remembers how you handled conflict without escalating, how you didn't make every challenge about winning, how you could disagree without destabilizing the connection. Those moments weren't dramatic, but they were revealing. Charm impresses in short bursts. Discipline reveals itself slowly. Emotional balance doesn't shout, it accumulates. And once she starts measuring instead of feeling, those qualities rise to the surface naturally. This is why character ages better than chemistry. Chemistry depends on conditions, mood, timing, novelty. Character remains when all of that fades. And now, with distance and perspective, she sees the difference. You weren't performing stability to be admired. You weren't trying to impress with control. You were simply ordered within yourself. And when emotions are no longer guiding her choices, that inner order stands out more clearly than anything charm ever promised. Number 8. Your growth continues without her. While she focused on replacement, you focused on refinement. That difference matters more than it first appears. When she stepped away, her energy went outward toward distraction, novelty, and the reassurance of something new. Yours went inward, not in isolation or bitterness, but in recalibration. You didn't pause your life waiting to be chosen again. You didn't sit still, hoping for clarity to come from someone else. You kept moving. There's a quiet strength in continuing when no one is watching. You adjusted your routines. You tightened the habits that had slipped. You became more intentional with your time, your body, your mind. Not to send a message, not to create jealousy, but because growth, for you, isn't a reaction. It's a baseline. That's a deeply Stoic approach. Stoicism doesn't teach men to improve for applause. It teaches improvement as duty, as alignment. You didn't announce your progress. You didn't make dramatic declarations about becoming better. You simply embodied change through consistency, day by day, choice by choice. And here's the part most people don't realize. Growth without external validation is the most destabilizing thing to someone who expected you to break. She may have assumed your silence meant stagnation, that your absence meant decline, that without her presence, your momentum would fade. That's often the unspoken expectation when someone leaves. But reality moves differently. As time passes, she begins to notice, sometimes indirectly, sometimes through small glimpses, that you didn't fall apart. You didn't spiral emotionally. You didn't chase closure. Instead, you look more grounded, more focused, less reactive, more centered in yourself. This is when the comparison returns, but from a completely different angle. Before, comparison was about excitement versus calm. Now, it's about trajectory, direction, stability over time. She sees that while she searched outward for replacement, you built inward for permanence. And that realization hits deeper than regret. Because growth that continues without her presence challenges a hidden belief that she was the source of your value. When that belief collapses, the narrative shifts. You weren't stable because of the relationship. You were stable because of who you are. Stoicism teaches that a man's progress should never depend on circumstance. External changes don't dictate internal standards. You lived that principle without naming it. And when she recognizes that your evolution didn't pause when she left, something settles in. You didn't need her absence to become someone else. You simply became more of yourself. And that kind of growth doesn't just stand out, it lingers. Take a quiet moment to sit with this, not to analyze her choices, but to reflect on your own trajectory. Ask yourself where your energy has been going when no one was rewarding it, praising it, or even noticing it. That's where real alignment shows up. If this resonates, drop a comment and share what refinement has looked like for you lately, whether it's discipline, routine, mindset, or simply staying steady when it would have been easier to drift. Your reflection might be the mirror someone else needs right now. Number 9. Regret doesn't arrive loudly. Regret doesn't show up like heartbreak. It's quieter. It doesn't announce itself with tears or dramatic realizations. It slips in unnoticed. A random memory while doing something ordinary. A fleeting comparison she didn't intend to make. A sudden pause when something feels off, and she can't immediately explain why. At first, she may brush it away. Tell herself it's just nostalgia, just a passing thought. But regret doesn't need intensity to be powerful. It works through repetition. Small moments stacking quietly on top of each other. A conversation that feels shallow. A reaction that feels unnecessary. A sense that something solid is missing beneath the surface. That's when the realization begins to take shape. What she gave up wasn't dramatic. It wasn't flashy. It didn't come with fireworks or emotional highs. It was rare. And rare things are often mistaken for ordinary until they're gone. She starts remembering the way you handled situations without needing control. The way you stayed grounded when things were uncertain. The way you didn't demand reassurance, yet offered reliability. Those traits don't stand out in emotionally charged moments. They stand out in contrast, over time. Regret doesn't force its way in. It settles. It reframes the past slowly. She may not talk about it. She may not reach out. She may even act unchanged on the surface. But internally, something shifts. The narrative she once relied on loses certainty. You stop feeling like someone from before and start feeling like a reference point. This is where Stoic value reveals itself most clearly. Stoicism isn't designed to win emotional moments. It's built for endurance. A Stoic man doesn't need immediate recognition. He trusts that consistency will outlast impulse. That character will eventually be seen, even if it's too late to act on it. She begins seeing you not as the past, but as the standard she didn't recognize in time. Not because you demanded that role, but because your behavior earned it quietly, and standards don't disappear. They stay in the background, shaping future expectations whether acknowledged or not. That's the weight of quiet regret. It doesn't scream. It lingers. It shows up in comparisons she didn't plan to make, in moments where something feels missing but can't be named. And in the long run, it's impossible to ignore. Stoic value doesn't rush to be understood. It allows time to do its work. And when regret finally arrives, it doesn't need noise to make its point. Number 10. You're no longer waiting to be chosen. And here's the final twist. By the time her perspective shifts, yours already has. While she was processing, comparing, reassessing, you were moving forward, quietly, intentionally. You didn't stay frozen at the moment she left. You didn't keep a door open out of hope or habit. You kept walking. There was a time when being chosen mattered to you, when recognition felt like confirmation, when someone else's decision had the power to steady or shake your sense of worth. But that phase passed. Not because you hardened, but because you clarified. You learned where your value comes from. You're no longer standing where she left you. You're not waiting for someone to circle back and finally see what was there all along. You're living from a different reference point now, one that doesn't depend on being selected. This is where Stoicism completes the arc. Stoic philosophy doesn't teach men to reject connection. It teaches them not to outsource their identity. Validation becomes optional, not necessary. Approval becomes a bonus, not a foundation. You begin living by internal standards instead of emotional feedback. You choose what aligns with your peace. You choose relationships that respect your rhythm instead of disrupting it. You choose direction over distraction. And that shift changes everything, including how you're perceived. Because when she looks back now, she doesn't just see what she lost. She sees distance where access once existed. She sees a version of you that's no longer available in the same way. Not because you closed yourself off, but because you moved forward without needing her permission. This is the part that often goes unspoken. Regret becomes heavier when opportunity is gone, when timing no longer favors re-entry, when the person she once felt certain she could return to is no longer waiting in the same emotional place. You didn't grow to prove anything. You grew because growth became non-negotiable. And that's what makes this ending different. There's no dramatic confrontation, no final conversation that ties everything up neatly. Just two people standing in different places. And from where you are now, being chosen is no longer the goal. Alignment is, peace is, direction is. So when she finally sees clearly, she's not just looking back at a choice she misjudged. She's looking at a man who chose himself and kept going. She may come to her conclusions quietly, without announcements, without confessions, but by the time clarity reaches her, you're already living from a different place. You're no longer defined by who chose you or who walked away. You're grounded in your own standards, your own direction, and your own peace. And that's the real ending of this story. Not regret on her side, but resolve on yours. If this message resonated with you, take a second to like the video. It helps this channel reach men who need it. Leave a comment and share what part stood out most. And when you're ready, watch the recommended videos on screen to keep building that calm, disciplined strength that never needs to prove itself. She's not gone the way you think she is. She may not be texting. She may not be calling. She may even act like she's moved on. But behind the scenes, she's watching, quietly, carefully, trying to understand the version of you that emerged after she stepped back. Because what unsettles her isn't your absence, it's your stability inside that absence. And before she ever comes back, there's a stage she goes through. First, a phase where she observes, measures, and reassesses the man you've become. That's exactly what we're breaking down today. If this hits home, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's get into it. Number 1. The silent check-in. She doesn't reach out. Not yet. Instead, she checks from a distance, views your story, scrolls your page, notices small changes. This is low-risk observation. She wants information without vulnerability. And here's the part most men misunderstand. This isn't indifference. It's caution. It's curiosity wrapped in self-protection. She's trying to answer questions without asking them. Are you okay? Are you affected? Did you move on? Did your silence mean strength, or was it just temporary pride? She's gathering emotional data without putting herself on the line, because reaching out would require admitting that your absence landed. Before, you might have posted things hoping she'd see, maybe subtle quotes, maybe highlights designed to trigger a reaction. That's what most people do when they want to be noticed, but don't want to be direct. But now, you're just living. And that's the difference. Your posts, if there are any at all, don't feel staged. They don't feel like signals. They feel neutral, real, unbothered. And that unsettles her more than anything emotional ever could. Because when a man stops performing, the observer loses control of the narrative. She can't easily label your silence as manipulation or strategy. There's no obvious hook, no emotional bait, just movement, progress, normal life continuing without commentary. And that forces her to sit with uncertainty, the kind that quietly grows louder over time. From a Stoic perspective, this is the shift from seeking external validation to internal alignment. You're no longer adjusting your behavior to provoke a response. You're acting in accordance with your own standards, regardless of who's watching. Marcus Aurelius talked about how little control we have over how others perceive us, and how freeing it is when we stop trying to manage it. That's what's happening here, whether you realize it or not. She notices the subtle things. Your tone looks calmer. Your energy feels steadier. There's no urgency in your presence. And that calm reads as confidence, even if you never intended it to. She feels like she's looking at someone who doesn't need her reaction to stay grounded. And that's where curiosity deepens. Because the moment a woman realizes she's watching you, and you're not watching back, the emotional balance quietly shifts. She came to observe. She stayed because something felt different. And without saying a word, you showed her exactly what she wasn't prepared to see. A man who didn't collapse when she stepped away. Number 2. Curiosity replaces closure. She thought your story was finished, that your role in her life had a clear ending, but your calm disrupts that narrative. Most people expect endings to look a certain way. Drama, final conversations, emotional explanations that wrap everything up neatly so the mind can move on. She expected something like that from you too. A message, a reaction. A moment where you tried to define what happened or defend your side of the story. That would have given her closure. It would have allowed her to file you away as resolved. But instead, she got something far more unsettling. Your composure. You're not chasing, not explaining, not trying to rewrite history. And because of that, nothing feels complete. There's no emotional punctuation mark at the end of your story, just a pause. And psychologically, that pause becomes a problem. The human mind hates open loops. When there's no clear ending, the mind keeps returning to the unfinished thread, trying to make sense of it. That's where curiosity quietly replaces closure. She starts replaying moments, not because she wants to feel pain, but because she wants understanding. Why didn't you react the way she expected? Why didn't you push back or try to fix things? Was your silence confidence? Or was it something deeper? Each unanswered question keeps you present in her thoughts, without you having to do anything at all. This is where many men sabotage themselves. They rush to clarify, to explain their intentions, to make sure they're understood. But Stoic strength shows up here as restraint. You don't force meaning. You let silence do what arguments never could. Epictetus spoke about how we don't control events, only our responses to them. By choosing not to react impulsively, you're demonstrating mastery over yourself, and that self-mastery becomes the message. From her perspective, your calm feels almost unnatural. She expected emotional turbulence. Instead, she sees steadiness. She expected distance to make you reach. Instead, distance made you grounded. And that contrast creates friction in her internal story. The version of you she thought she understood no longer fits. Now, instead of feeling finished, she feels curious. She wonders if she misjudged you, if there was more depth there than she recognized at the time. And curiosity is far more powerful than regret because it keeps the door mentally open. Closure would have allowed her to move on cleanly. Curiosity keeps her lingering in thought. And the key thing to remember as you listen to this, you didn't create this effect by being cold or strategic. You created it by being consistent, by not scrambling to control the outcome, by trusting that your dignity didn't need a final speech. That's Stoicism in action. Not silence as punishment, but silence as self-respect. So, before we move into the next part, take a moment to sit with this idea. Sometimes, the most powerful shift isn't what you say, but what you refuse to chase. Her curiosity didn't grow because you tried to prove a point. It grew because you remained anchored in yourself. And that's a kind of presence most people aren't prepared for. If this resonates so far, make sure to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, or simply type, "I stay steady in my silence." Let's continue. Number 3. She studies your pattern. Anyone can act composed for a few days. She's watching for consistency. This is the phase where time does most of the talking. In the beginning, she might assume your calm is temporary, a phase, a front, a delayed reaction that will eventually crack. So she waits. She checks again later, then again. Not obsessively, but deliberately. She's looking for patterns, because patterns reveal truth in a way words never can. Do you spiral later? Do emotional posts appear out of nowhere? Do you start sending indirect signals, vague quotes, or sudden displays meant to be noticed? Does your energy subtly shift from grounded to restless? These are the signs she expects to see, because they're common. They would confirm that your silence wasn't strength. It was just restraint with an expiration date. But if none of that happens, if your life keeps moving forward in a steady rhythm, something shifts inside her, because now she's not looking at a reaction anymore. She's looking at a lifestyle. And lifestyles are harder to dismiss than moments. She notices that weeks pass, and your tone doesn't change. You don't suddenly become louder. You don't become colder either. There's no emotional whiplash, just consistency. That steadiness creates a subtle tension for her, because it removes the story she was telling herself, the one where you eventually come undone, the one where distance makes you chase. When that story collapses, she has to write a new one. This is where Stoicism shows its real depth. Stoicism isn't a mood, it's a pattern. It's the quiet discipline of responding the same way on day 30 as you did on day 3. Calm, not because you're trying to appear strong, but because you've already accepted what you can't control. Seneca wrote that real power is being able to endure without complaint and act without excess. That's what she's witnessing now, even if she doesn't have words for it. And here's the part most men don't realize. Patterns create trust, even from afar. She may not fully understand what she's feeling, but she senses reliability in your presence. You're no longer unpredictable. You're no longer emotionally reactive. You're solid, and solidity is rare. She starts to feel that if she were to step back into your world, she wouldn't be walking into chaos or neediness. She'd be walking into stability. That realization doesn't arrive dramatically. It settles slowly, quietly, almost reluctantly. And all the while, you didn't set out to prove anything. You just kept living in alignment with yourself. That's the paradox here. The less you try to influence her perception, the more your consistency reshapes it. Number 4. The replacement test. She looks for signs you've built new connections, new routines, new focus. Not because she wants you miserable, but because your forward movement forces her to confront reality. This is where her curiosity turns slightly uneasy. She scans for evidence that life didn't pause when she stepped back, not in a dramatic way. She's not hoping to see you broken or desperate. What she's really checking is whether you're still emotionally parked where she left you, or whether the world kept moving without her. You're not waiting in emotional suspension anymore, and that's the part that quietly hits. She notices you're filling your time differently. Maybe your schedule looks fuller. Maybe your energy feels directed somewhere specific. Maybe there are hints of new conversations, new circles, or simply a renewed focus on yourself. Nothing flashy, nothing designed to provoke jealousy, just motion. This creates a subtle internal conflict for her. On one hand, she might tell herself she wanted space, freedom, or distance. On the other hand, seeing you actually adapt to that reality makes it real in a way she wasn't fully prepared for. Because when a man stays frozen, it preserves the illusion of control. But when he moves forward, it introduces consequence. A lot of men try to weaponize this phase. They post exaggerated displays, try to signal that they've upgraded, or subtly compete for attention. But a Stoic man doesn't threaten to move on. He simply continues living. That distinction matters. You're not announcing progress. You're embodying it. And that authenticity is what makes the message land. From a Stoic lens, this is about aligning action with acceptance. You've accepted that you can't force outcomes, only your conduct. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily to focus on the task in front of him, not the reactions of others. That's what you're doing now. You're investing in your life because it's yours, not because someone might be watching. And she can feel the difference. There's no bitterness behind your growth, no resentment driving your movement, just quiet direction. That's what makes it unsettling. Because now, the question isn't, will he come back to me? It becomes, what happens if I don't step back in? Progress becomes your quiet message, not as a warning, not as a tactic, but as a reflection of self-respect. And when a woman realizes she's no longer the center of your momentum, but merely someone who could rejoin it, that's when reality fully sets in. Number 5. She measures your emotional access. Before, she could pull emotion out of you, instantly reassurance, explanation, reaction. Now she's unsure. There was a time when access to you was effortless. A short message could trigger a long response. A hint of distance could pull reassurance from you without her ever asking for it. She didn't have to wonder how you felt, because your emotions were always close to the surface, available, responsive, predictable. And predictability, while comforting at first, slowly becomes invisible. Now that changes, not because you're trying to withhold, but because you've learned to regulate yourself. And that shift creates uncertainty for her. She no longer knows which version of you she'll get if she opens the door even slightly. That's why she tests it. If she sends something small, a casual check-in, a neutral reaction, a light message she's watching closely, will you overinvest? Will you rush to fill the space with meaning? Will you read into it and respond with emotional weight? Or will you stay grounded, present, but measured? Your response tells her more than any declaration ever could. A calm, steady reply signals that you're no longer operating from emotional hunger. You're not starved for connection. You're open, but not exposed. And that balance is rare. This is where boundaries quietly replace effort. Not boundaries built from resentment or fear, but boundaries built from self-respect. Stoicism teaches that we should govern our inner world before attempting to manage external ones. You're not denying emotion, you're deciding when and how it's shared. And that decision alone restores power. She starts to feel that emotional access to you is no longer automatic. It has to be earned through consistency, clarity, and mutual presence. And that realization shifts how she approaches you. She becomes more careful, more intentional, because she senses that you won't meet her halfway if she's only offering a toe in the water. Limited emotional access creates value, not because you're playing hard to get, but because you're no longer emotionally available to uncertainty. You don't punish. You don't withdraw dramatically. You simply don't give full access to someone who hasn't shown they can meet you with the same depth. And here's the quiet truth most men miss. When a woman realizes she can't casually access your emotional core anymore, she doesn't feel rejected, she feels curious. Because emotional access, once freely given, and then calmly regulated, becomes something meaningful, something worth considering, something she now has to approach with care. Take a moment here and sit with what just landed. This shift isn't loud or dramatic, but it's meaningful. You're no longer reacting from emotional hunger, you're responding from self-respect. And that changes how you're felt, not just heard. Reflect on this. How does it feel to be open without being exposed? Present without overgiving? If this resonates, leave a comment and share what shift you've noticed in yourself lately, because recognizing your own emotional discipline is how you make it permanent. Number 6. Jealousy without drama. This stage is subtle. She doesn't explode with jealousy. She compares silently. There's no confrontation here, no emotional outbursts, no obvious signs of insecurity. On the surface, everything looks calm, but internally, a quiet comparison begins. She notices how you carry yourself now, the way your energy feels different. The absence of tension where there used to be urgency. And that contrast lingers in her mind longer than she expects. You seem lighter, more focused, less reactive. Not because you're trying to impress anyone, but because you're no longer carrying emotional weight that wasn't yours to hold. And that difference becomes uncomfortable for her, not out of resentment, but reflection. Because when someone grows without bitterness, it forces others to examine their own choices. She starts to notice how your presence feels steadier than before, how you don't lean into situations seeking validation, how you don't subtly ask to be chosen anymore. And in that stillness, a quiet question forms. Why does he seem more grounded now than when we were closer? That question doesn't have an easy answer, and that's what makes it stick. This isn't jealousy fueled by fear of loss alone. It's jealousy mixed with self-awareness. She compares where you are emotionally to where she assumed you'd be. And when those expectations don't align, something shifts. Your growth becomes a mirror, not a weapon, not a threat. Just a reflection she didn't plan to look into. Stoicism teaches inner cultivation, the idea that a man's primary task is to govern himself, not to compete with others. When you focus on your discipline, your clarity, your daily conduct, comparison becomes irrelevant to you. But paradoxically, it becomes unavoidable for those watching from the outside. You're not louder than before. You're not flaunting success or new connections. You're simply more composed. And composition reads as strength. She may scroll past a moment in your life and feel a strange mix of pride, curiosity, and discomfort. Not because she wants you back yet, but because she sees that you didn't fall apart without her. That realization carries weight, because it suggests that your value wasn't dependent on her presence. And when a woman senses that she wasn't the source of your stability, only someone who once shared space within it, the emotional ground subtly shifts. You didn't compete. You didn't prove anything. You simply built yourself. And that quiet progress speaks louder than any display ever could. Number 7. The soft probe. Then comes the small reach, a casual message, a meme, a random question. It's not about the content. It's about testing the emotional temperature. This is where things often get misread. On the surface, it looks harmless, almost meaningless, something she could easily explain away if needed. And that's exactly why she chooses this approach. It gives her plausible deniability. If you respond strongly, she learns something. If you don't, she learns something else. Either way, she gets information without having to expose her intentions. She's not asking to reconnect yet. She's checking whether the door still feels open, whether the emotional environment around you has changed, whether your calm is real or whether it disappears the moment she steps back into the frame. Do you jump in like before? Do you respond quickly, with enthusiasm, extra context, emotional warmth that spills over? Or do you reply like a centered man present, but not leaning, friendly, but not invested beyond what's offered? Your response matters here, not because of what you say, but how you say it. A grounded reply tells her that you're no longer operating from anticipation. You're not waiting for signs. You're not treating every interaction as an opportunity to reconnect. You're simply meeting the moment as it is nothing more, nothing less. Stoic presence shows up clearly here, not as emotional distance, but emotional regulation. The Stoics believed in acting in accordance with reason rather than impulse. You're not suppressing interest. You're pacing it. You're allowing connection to unfold naturally, instead of forcing it forward. She feels that difference immediately. There's no pressure in your tone, no subtle pull, no emotional gravity trying to draw her closer. And that absence of pressure creates safety but also intrigue, because now she has to decide what to bring next. You're no longer doing the emotional work for both of you. Not cold, not eager, just stable. That stability sends a quiet message. You're open to connection, but not dependent on it. You can engage without attaching. You can respond without chasing. And that balance is rare enough to make her pause. In that pause, something important happens. She stops feeling like she's controlling the interaction. Instead, she feels like she's meeting someone who stands on his own ground. And whether she realizes it or not, that's the moment her curiosity deepens, because stability isn't something you test once. It's something you slowly lean toward. Number 8. She watches how you handle praise. Maybe she compliments you, acknowledges your change. Before, that might have pulled you back into emotional overdrive. A simple comment used to carry weight. A few kind words could shift your mood, your pace, even your direction. You might have leaned in harder, opened up faster, or subtly adjusted yourself to keep that warmth coming. Not because you were weak, but because approval felt like momentum, like confirmation that you were moving in the right direction. Now, you receive it differently. You hear the compliment, you register it, and you let it pass through you without changing your center. There's no rush to capitalize on it. No sudden increase in emotional availability. No unspoken, maybe this means something more. Just a calm, thank you energy. That response tells her more than the compliment itself ever could. She's watching closely here, not to manipulate, but to understand. Is your growth stable, or is it still dependent on how she shows up? Does appreciation still pull you off course, or has it become something you can receive without attachment? When your behavior doesn't shift after praise, it creates a subtle tension, because most people are moved by approval, even when they don't admit it. When someone isn't, it signals independence. Not emotional distance, but emotional sovereignty. This is Stoic independence in practice. The Stoics didn't reject praise, but they didn't rely on it either. They understood that external validation is fleeting, and that tying your identity to it makes you reactive. You're not dismissing her words. You're simply not building meaning around them. She notices that your tone stays the same. Your boundaries remain intact. Your pace doesn't change. And that consistency sends a powerful signal. You were already grounded before she said anything. That realization can be disarming, because now, praise doesn't buy access. It doesn't reopen doors. It doesn't shift the balance. It's appreciated, but it doesn't steer you. And that forces her to reconsider how connection with you works now. From her side, it feels different than before. Safer, in a way, but also more real. She senses that if she wants to reconnect, it won't happen through emotional nudges or validation. It will require presence, effort, and clarity. And all the while, you didn't do anything dramatic. You didn't withhold warmth. You didn't lean away. You simply stayed centered. That's the quiet power here. Because when approval no longer controls you, it becomes what it was always meant to be, a moment, not a compass. This is a good moment to turn the focus inward for a second, not on her reaction, but on your own emotional steadiness. Ask yourself, do compliments still shift your mood, your pace, your sense of direction? Or can you receive them and remain exactly who you already are? Real growth shows most when things feel good and you still stay grounded. Take a moment to reflect on where you are in that journey. Share your thoughts in the comments, or simply type, "I stay centered." Let's explore what's coming up next in this journey. Number 9. The regret loop begins. When she sees you thriving without her emotional validation, something clicks. Not all at once, not dramatically. It's quieter than that, almost inconvenient. She didn't expect this version of you to exist without her involvement. Somewhere along the way, she assumed your stability was connected to her presence, her feedback, her attention. Seeing you grounded without any of that forces a recalibration she didn't plan for. This is where memory begins to change shape. Moments she once dismissed start to surface again, but they land differently now. Your patience doesn't look passive anymore. Your steadiness doesn't look boring. Your effort doesn't look guaranteed. What once felt ordinary now feels rare, precisely because it's no longer available on demand. Absence reframes memory in a powerful way. When someone is always accessible, their qualities fade into the background. But when access is removed, the mind fills the space by reevaluating what was lost. She starts replaying interactions not with certainty, but with doubt. Did she misread your calm as complacency? Did she underestimate your emotional discipline? Did she take your presence for granted because it felt stable? This isn't regret fueled by guilt. It's regret fueled by contrast. She sees who you are now and mentally overlays it with who you were then, and suddenly the gap becomes visible. The version of you she walked away from looks more valuable in hindsight, not because you changed who you were, but because you stopped offering it freely. From a Stoic perspective, this is the natural consequence of alignment. Stoicism doesn't seek revenge. It doesn't orchestrate lessons. It doesn't require you to win. It simply lets reality do its work. You focused on governing yourself. You stayed consistent. You built forward. And in doing so, you allowed truth to surface without confrontation. She feels the loop beginning, the quiet cycle of reflection, the subtle "what if" that returns uninvited, not because you reminded her, not because you reached out, but because your absence now carries clarity instead of chaos. And here's the important part for you, as you're listening. This stage isn't about waiting for her regret. It's about not interrupting it. Many men rush in when they sense this shift, trying to extract closure or validation. But Stoic discipline means allowing emotional processes to unfold without interference. If she returns, it will be because the lesson completed itself. Not because you demanded recognition, but because your life continued, and in doing so, quietly rewrote the meaning of what she lost. Number 10. The timing game. She doesn't rush back. She waits for a moment that feels safe. A time when she thinks you're still open but not so far gone that she has no place. This waiting isn't indecision. It's calculation mixed with emotion. She's trying to find the narrow window where re-entry feels possible without risking rejection. Too early, and she fears you might still be guarded or uninterested. Too late, and she worries she may no longer fit into the life you've built. So she watches, measures, times it in her head. She looks for signs that you're still receptive, but not desperate, still warm, but no longer stationary. Because returning only feels safe when she believes she won't be turned away and that you haven't emotionally replaced her entirely. That balance matters to her more than she'll ever say out loud. Meanwhile, you're not waiting at all. Your life is moving, not in a rushed way, not to prove anything, just forward. You're focused on your routines, your discipline, your direction. You're not counting days. You're not scanning for signs. And that's the irony of this phase. The less you wait, the more space she feels to approach. From a Stoic perspective, this is patience in its truest form, not patience as delay, but patience as confidence. The Stoics understood that impatience is rooted in dependency, the need for an outcome to resolve discomfort. But when you're building something solid within yourself, time stops feeling urgent. You're no longer suspended between hope and fear. You're anchored. And that anchoring removes pressure from the situation entirely. There's no internal countdown, no emotional clock ticking. Whether she returns today, months from now, or not at all, your life remains intact. She senses that. She feels that your openness isn't performative. It's conditional on alignment, not timing. And that realization changes how she approaches you. Because now, returning isn't about fixing the past, it's about meeting the present version of you. And here's the quiet truth. When a man stops waiting for the right moment, he becomes the moment. His life gains momentum. His presence gains weight. And if she does choose to step back in, it won't be because time ran out. It will be because she finally caught up to the pace you were already moving at. Take a second and really sit with that. Are you still secretly waiting in the background of your own life? Or are you genuinely moving forward regardless of the outcome? That question changes everything. Drop a comment below and share where you are in this phase. Are you still watching the door? Or have you started building a life that doesn't pause for anyone? Number 11. The return with conditions. When she finally comes back, it rarely starts with a full emotional confession. It's a temperature check. It might sound casual, familiar, almost like nothing ever changed. A light message, a soft reconnection, something that allows her to step back into your space without fully exposing herself. She's not leading with vulnerability yet, she's sensing the ground, feeling for stability, seeing whether the version of you she's been watching from a distance is still there when she gets closer. And this is where the real shift happens, not in her behavior, but in yours. Because you're no longer trying to be chosen. There's no internal pressure to secure her interest or lock the moment in. You're not rushing to reestablish what once was. You're present, open, but observant. You're paying attention, not just to how she feels, but to how you feel around her. That's a profound change. Before, connection might have felt like something to win back or protect at all costs. Now, it feels like something to evaluate. Does this interaction feel calm, respectful, aligned? Or does it pull you back into old patterns of overthinking and emotional imbalance? This is Stoic power in action. Not control over her, control over yourself. The Stoics believe that freedom comes from governing your responses, not from influencing others. You're no longer handing your peace over to uncertainty. You're guarding it quietly. She senses that difference immediately. There's no desperation in your tone, no eagerness to prove you're worthy of her return. And that steadiness changes the dynamic. Because now, she's not stepping back into a role of emotional authority. She's entering a space where mutual fit matters. If she leans in with consistency, presence, and clarity, the connection deepens naturally. If she stays vague, inconsistent, or half-available, you don't argue or chase, you notice. And you choose accordingly. That's the condition, even if it's never spoken aloud. And here's the closing truth for you as a viewer. The power wasn't in making her come back. The power was in becoming someone who didn't need the outcome to feel whole. Whether she stays or walks again, your center remains intact. That's not indifference, that's self-mastery. And self-mastery is the only form of control that actually lasts. And that's the real shift. Not the moment she looks back, but the moment you stopped needing her to. You didn't harden. You didn't play games. You simply became steady in your own life. While she was trying to figure out what your silence meant, you were building a version of yourself that no longer collapses when someone steps away. And that's why this stage matters so much. Because before she ever returns, if she returns, she has to process the reality of a man who is no longer emotionally parked where she left him. A man whose calm is not a phase, but a foundation. If this resonated with you, make sure to like the video so more men can hear this message. Drop a comment and share which stage stood out to you the most. I read them. And when this ends, check out the recommended videos on your screen, because they'll help you go even deeper into building that kind of quiet, unshakable presence.